The howling wind tore through the mountain pass with such fury that Violet Morrison could no longer feel her fingers wrapped around the reins. And as her husband's horse disappeared into the white curtain ahead without so much as a backward glance, she realized with crystalline certainty that he had left her to die. Her twin babies, barely 3 months old, were bundled against her chest beneath her wool coat, their small bodies the only warmth she had left in this frozen hell. The snowstorm had descended on them without warning as they traveled through the Colorado Rockies in late November of 1878, transforming the mountain trail into a treacherous maze of ice and blinding white. Thomas had been riding ahead, leading them toward what he claimed would be a new life in California, away from the shame that had followed them since the twins were born. But when the storm hit and her horse stumbled when she cried out for help, he had simply kept riding. She had seen it in that one moment before the snow swallowed him completely. The way he did not even turn his head at her screams. Violet slid from her horse, her legs giving out beneath her as she hit the frozen ground. The mare, sensing freedom, bolted into the storm, leaving her completely alone with Samuel and Sarah pressed against her heart. She could feel their small bodies stirring, their muffled cries barely audible over the wind. She tried to stand, but her skirts were heavy with ice, and her body was shutting down from the cold. The babies needed shelter, needed warmth, needed everything she could not give them in this moment. She crawled forward, dragging herself through the snow toward what looked like an outcropping of rocks. Her vision was blurring, and her thoughts were becoming slow and confused. All she could think was that she had to keep the babies warm, had to protect them with her body even if it meant freezing to death herself. They were innocent in all of this, innocent of the fact that their father had never wanted them, had seen them as burdens from the moment they drew breath. The rocks provided some small shelter from the wind, and Violet curled herself around the twins, tucking them as deeply into her coat as possible. She could feel herself fading, feel the cold seeping into her bones with a strange kind of peace. At least the babies would not be alone when the end came. At least they would be held. She did not know how long she lay there in the snow. Time lost all meaning as the world turned white and silent. But then there was a sound, a voice calling through the storm, and strong hands were lifting her, and a man's face appeared above her own, weathered and concerned beneath the brim of a frost-covered hat. "Madam, can you hear me? I have got you now, I have got you." Violet tried to speak, but her lips would not move. She managed only to press her hands more firmly against the babies, a wordless plea to save them first. The man seemed to understand immediately. "Your young ones are safe. I am going to get all of you to warmth. Just hold on." She felt herself being lifted, felt the strange sensation of being carried, and then she knew nothing at all. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Warmth first, blessed and overwhelming warmth that hurt almost as much as the cold had. Then voices, low and urgent. Then the sound of a baby crying, which brought Violet fully awake with a gasp. "Easy now," that same male voice said, and a hand pressed gently against her shoulder. "Your babies are right here. They are safe." Violet's eyes flew open, and she found herself lying on a narrow bed in a small cabin, a fire roaring in the stone fireplace across the room. Her babies were beside her, both wrapped in blankets and crying with the hearty indignation of hungry infants. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that tears spilled down her cheeks. "Thank God," she whispered, reaching for them with shaking hands. The man who had saved them stepped back to give her space. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair and eyes that were a startling shade of green in his sun-weathered face. His clothes marked him as a working man, a cowboy most likely, with worn denim and a flannel shirt open at the collar. "They have been warming up for about an hour," he said. "I think they are more angry than hurt, which is a good sign, but they will be wanting to eat soon." Violet pulled the babies close, pressing her face against their small heads. They were alive. They were warm. The miracle of it was almost too much to comprehend. "How did you find us?" "I was checking my fence lines before the storm got too bad. Saw your horse running loose and figured someone was in trouble. Followed your tracks back until I found you under those rocks." He moved to the fire and lifted a kettle from the hook. "Name is James O'Brien. This is my cabin about 5 miles outside Georgetown." "Georgetown, Colorado?" Violet asked, trying to orient herself. The last town they had passed through had been somewhere in the mountains, but she had lost track of the names. "Yes, madam. Mining town, mostly. Not much to speak of, but it has got supplies and a doctor if you need one." Violet looked down at the twins, checking them over with a mother's careful eye. Samuel's little face was red from crying, but he seemed otherwise unharmed. Sarah was quieter, her dark eyes open and watchful. "I think we are all right. Thanks to you, Mr. O'Brien. James is fine." He poured hot water into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Drink this. You need to warm up from the inside." She accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her still trembling hands around it. The heat seeped into her palms and she took a careful sip. It was just water, but it tasted like salvation. "I am Violet Morrison. These are Samuel and Sarah." James nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Where were you headed, Mrs. Morrison?" The title felt like a brand and Violet flinched. "It is just Violet, and we were. My husband was taking us to California, but he—" She could not finish the sentence, could not quite make herself say the words out loud. "He left you in the storm," James said quietly. It was not a question. Violet looked away, shame burning in her chest. "Yes." There was a long moment of silence. Then James said, his voice hard, "What kind of man leaves his wife and babies to die in a blizzard? The kind who never wanted them in the first place." The words came out bitter and raw. Violet had not meant to say them, but exhaustion and relief had stripped away her defenses. "He married me because it was the right thing to do when I became pregnant, but he resented every moment of it. When the babies came and there were 2 instead of 1, something in him just broke." James turned away and she heard him take a deep breath, as if trying to control his anger. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully even. "Well, he is not here now and you are. That is what matters. You and your babies need rest and food and time to recover. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need." "I cannot impose on you," Violet said automatically, though the thought of leaving this warm cabin made her want to weep. "You have already done so much. You nearly froze to death. Your babies nearly froze to death. That is not something you just walk away from after a few hours by the fire." James moved to the small kitchen area and began pulling out supplies. "I've got dried meat and beans and some canned vegetables. Not fancy, but it will fill your belly. Once the storm clears, I can ride into town and get more supplies. Baby things too, if you need them." Violet felt tears threatening again. Kindness from a stranger felt impossibly precious after months of coldness from her own husband. "Why are you helping us?" James paused, his hand stilling over the food. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because no woman and no babies should be left to die in the cold, and because—" He turned to look at her, and there was something fierce in his eyes. "Because maybe I know what it is like to be alone when you need help most." He did not elaborate, and Violet did not press. Instead, she focused on the twins, who were starting to fuss more insistently. "I need to feed them. Is there somewhere I could have a bit of privacy? The bedroom is through that door." James gestured to a rough wooden door in the back wall. "Take your time. I will get some food ready for when you are done." Violet gathered the babies carefully and made her way to the bedroom on unsteady legs. It was a simple room with a large bed covered in quilts and a dresser with a cracked mirror. She sat on the edge of the bed and unbuttoned her dress, letting first Samuel and then Sarah nurse. As they ate, their small bodies finally relaxing, Violet allowed herself to really take in what had happened. Thomas had abandoned them, had left her to die. The man she had married, the father of her children, had looked at the storm and decided it was easier to let nature do what he did not have the courage to do himself. The knowledge settled into her bones like a sickness. She had known he was unhappy, had known he resented the marriage, but she had not thought him capable of murder. Because that was what it had been, she realized. Attempted murder. And James O'Brien had saved them. A stranger with kind eyes and gentle hands had pulled them from the snow and brought them to safety without asking for anything in return. The contrast was so stark, it made her head spin. When both babies were fed and drowsing, Violet changed their damp clothes for dry ones from the small bag she had somehow managed to keep with her. She used a cloth from the dresser to clean them as best she could, checking them over once more for any signs of frostbite or injury. They seemed miraculously unharmed, their small bodies resilient in a way that made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. She settled them in the middle of the big bed, surrounded by pillows so they could not roll, and returned to the main room. James had set out plates of food on the small wooden table and was pouring coffee from a battered pot. "They are sleeping," Violet said softly. "Good. You should eat while you can." James pulled out a chair for her, a gesture so courteous it startled her. Thomas had stopped doing things like that within a month of their marriage. The food was simple but delicious, and Violet ate with the hunger of someone who had not had a proper meal in days. James ate across from her, his presence steady and undemanding. The storm continued to rage outside, wind battering the cabin walls, but inside it was warm and safe. "How long have you lived here?" Violet asked, needing to break the comfortable silence. "About 3 years. Came out from Missouri looking for work. Did some mining at first, but I am better with horses and cattle than I am with a pickaxe. Started working at a ranch about 10 miles south and saved up enough to buy this land and build this cabin. Run a few head of cattle, break horses for extra money. It is a simple life, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice, and Violet found herself smiling slightly. It is a good cabin, strong, had to be with winters like this. James took a sip of his coffee. "Georgetown is not a bad town if you are thinking of staying in the area, growing fast with the mining. They have got a school now and a church and a few decent stores. Doctor named Harrison who knows his business." Violet set down her fork, her appetite fading as reality crashed back in. "I do not know what I am going to do. I have no money, no family. Thomas had all our cash with him when he—" She could not finish. "When he left you to die," James finished bluntly. "That was not your fault, Violet. None of this is your fault. I should have seen it coming, should have known he was capable of something like this. No one expects the person they marry to try to kill them." James leaned forward, his green eyes intense. "You listen to me. You are alive. Your babies are alive. That is what matters right now. The rest we can figure out as we go." "We," Violet repeated softly. James seemed to realize what he had said and leaned back, color rising in his cheeks. "I just meant that you are not alone in this. I will help you however I can. Get you on your feet, help you find work or a place to stay in town. Whatever you need." The offer was so generous, so unexpected that Violet did not know what to say. She had been alone for so long, even when Thomas was still with her, that the idea of someone offering help felt almost foreign. "Why?" she asked again. "Why would you do all this for a stranger, James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Finally, he said, "My mother raised me and my two sisters alone after my father died. I was 10. I watched her work herself nearly to death trying to keep us fed and clothed, watched people in town look down on her because she was a woman alone. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in that situation, I would. So that is what I am doing." The simple honesty of it made Violet's throat tight. "Your mother must have been a remarkable woman." "She was, died 5 years back. But she taught me right from wrong, and that is not something I am going to forget." He stood and began clearing the dishes. "You should rest while the babies are sleeping. You have been through hell today." Violet wanted to argue, wanted to help, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a tide. She made her way back to the bedroom and lay down beside the twins, pulling the quilts over all of them. The bed was soft and warm and smelled faintly of wood smoke and leather. Within moments, she was asleep. She woke in darkness to the sound of one of the twins crying. Disoriented, she fumbled for the baby and realized it was Samuel, his small face scrunched up in distress. Sarah was still sleeping peacefully beside him. Violet lifted Samuel and held him close, murmuring soft reassurances as she checked to see if he needed changing. His diaper was dry, and when she offered to feed him, he latched on immediately, his cries subsiding into quiet suckling sounds. There was a soft knock on the door, and James's voice came through. "Everything all right?" "Yes, just feeding Samuel. I am sorry if we woke you." "You did not." "I do not sleep much anyway." There was a pause. "I am going to heat up some more food if you want any." "Thank you, that sounds wonderful." Violet fed Samuel and then changed both babies, noting with concern that their supply of clean cloths was running low. She wrapped them carefully and carried them out to the main room. James had lit several oil lamps and the cabin glowed with warm light. A pot was heating over the fire and the smell of beans and salt pork filled the air. "What time is it?" Violet asked, settling into a chair near the fire with both babies in her arms. "Near midnight. Storm is still going strong." James ladled food into bowls and brought one to her. "How are they doing?" "Better than they have any right to be. They are tough little things." Violet managed to eat one-handed while holding both babies, a skill she had perfected over the past 3 months. James watched her with an expression she could not quite read. "Can I hold one of them? Give you a chance to eat properly?" The offer surprised her, but Violet found herself nodding. Sarah is calmer. She might not mind. James took the baby with a care that suggested he was not entirely unfamiliar with infants. He settled into the chair across from Violet, cradling Sarah against his broad chest. The baby looked impossibly tiny in his arms, her small fist waving in the air as she made soft cooing sounds. "She is beautiful," James said quietly. "They both are." "Thank you. I think so too, though I know I am biased." Violet ate more quickly now that she had both hands free. "Have you been around babies much?" "My youngest sister had a daughter 2 years back. I helped out when I could before I left Missouri. Babies are not so scary once you get used to them." They sat together in the warm cabin while the storm raged outside, and Violet felt something in her chest loosen slightly. For the first time in months, she did not feel entirely alone. This man, this stranger, was treating her with more kindness and respect than her own husband had shown in all their time together. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being snowed into the small cabin with James O'Brien, and Violet found herself learning things about him in the forced intimacy of their situation. He was patient and thoughtful, quick to offer help with the babies, but never overstepping. He told her stories of his childhood in Missouri, of his sisters who had both married and stayed back east, of his journey west seeking something more than the life he had known. In turn, Violet found herself sharing her own story. She told him about growing up in a small town in Kansas, the daughter of a shopkeeper who had died when she was 16. About her mother's death 2 years later, leaving her alone and working as a seamstress to support herself. About meeting Thomas Morrison, a traveling salesman who had seemed charming and stable and like the answer to all her problems. He was different at first, she said on the second evening, watching the firelight dance across the walls. Attentive and kind. We courted for 3 months before he asked me to marry him. I thought I was lucky. She laughed bitterly. I got pregnant on our wedding night and everything changed. He said I had trapped him, that I had done it on purpose. When I started showing and the doctor said it was twins, he barely spoke to me for weeks. James's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. That is not a man. That is a coward. I kept thinking it would get better when the babies came. That he would see them and love them and everything would be all right. But it only got worse. He started talking about going to California for a fresh start, and I thought maybe he was right. Maybe distance from everything would help, but he did not want a fresh start. He just wanted to be rid of us. He failed, James said firmly. You are here, you are alive, and he is nothing but a memory you will eventually forget. Violet was not sure about that last part, but she appreciated the sentiment. What about you? Has there ever been anyone you wanted to marry? James shook his head. Been too focused on building something stable first. My father's death taught me that a man needs to have his feet under him before he tries to support a family. I have dated a few women in Georgetown, but nothing serious. Most of them are looking for minors who are going to strike it rich, and I am just a cowboy trying to make an honest living. An honest living is worth more than all the gold in these mountains, Violet said softly. Their eyes met across the cabin and something passed between them, a recognition of shared values and understanding. James looked away first, color rising in his cheeks, and went to check on the stew he was making for dinner. On the third night, the storm finally broke. Violet woke to silence, the absence of howling wind so complete it was almost eerie. She got up carefully, checking on the sleeping twins before padding out to the main room. James was already awake, standing at the window and looking out at the transformed landscape. It is over, he said without turning around. Violet joined him at the window and gasped. The world outside was buried in snow, great drifts of it piled against the cabin walls and covering everything in sight. The sky above was clear and filled with more stars than she had ever seen, brilliant against the black velvet of night. It is beautiful, she whispered. It is deadly, James corrected, but his voice was not unkind. That is at least 4 feet of snow out there, maybe more in the drifts. It is going to take time to dig out. Can we get to town? Eventually. I will start clearing a path tomorrow, probably take a few days before the road is passable though. He turned to look at her, and in the starlight his face was all sharp angles and shadows. That means you are stuck here with me a bit longer. I do not mind, Violet said, and realized she meant it. The cabin felt safe, felt like a haven, and James's presence had become comforting rather than awkward. You have been nothing but kind to us. You are easy guests. James smiled slightly. Even when the babies are screaming at 3 in the morning. They are not that bad, Violet protested, though she knew they had been fussy the previous night. I did not say it was a bad thing, just honest. James moved back to the fire and added another log. You should go back to sleep. Morning will come soon enough, and I am going to need help keeping those 2 entertained while I dig us out. Violet did as he suggested, but she lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet sounds of James moving around the cabin. She thought about Thomas, wondering where he was now, if he had made it to California, or if the storm had caught him too. Part of her hoped he was suffering, hoped he was cold and alone and regretting what he had done. But mostly, she just felt a strange kind of nothing when she thought of him. He was her past, a mistake she had made, but he did not have to be her future. Her future was here in this moment, with 2 babies who needed her and a kind cowboy who had saved them all. Where it would go from here, she did not know, but for the first time in months Violet felt something that might have been hope. James spent the next 2 days digging out from the storm. Violet watched from the window as he worked, his powerful frame moving steadily as he cleared a path from the cabin to the barn where his horse and cow were sheltered. He brought back fresh milk, and she used it to supplement her own for the twins, grateful for the extra nutrition. On the 3rd day after the storm, he announced that he was going to try to make it to town. The road should be passable now, and we are running low on supplies. Plus, I want to let people know you are here, see if anyone has news about your husband. The thought of Thomas being discussed in town made Violet's stomach turn, but she nodded. What should I tell people? About why I am here. The truth. That you were caught in the storm and I found you. That your husband abandoned you and you are looking for a place to stay and work. James pulled on his heavy coat and hat. People in Georgetown are decent folk for the most part. They will understand. And if Thomas comes looking for us, James's expression went hard, then he will have to deal with me first, but I do not think he will come back. Men like that do not return to face the consequences of what they have done. He left before dawn and Violet spent the day anxiously watching the road. She kept herself busy with the twins and with tidying the cabin, trying to repay James's kindness in whatever small ways she could. She washed clothes and dishes, swept the floor, organized the simple shelves. It felt good to be useful, to contribute something rather than just being a burden. James returned in the late afternoon with his horse loaded down with supplies. But he was not alone. A woman rode beside him, older and sturdy-looking, with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes. "Violet, this is Martha Sullivan," James said as he helped the woman down from her horse. "She owns the boarding house in town, and she has offered you a place to stay." Martha swept into the cabin with the confidence of someone used to taking charge. She looked Violet over with a critical but not unkind eye, then moved to where the twins were sleeping in a makeshift cradle James had fashioned from a drawer and some blankets. "Pretty babies," Martha said approvingly. "Healthy-looking too, considering what they have been through. James told me what happened. That husband of yours ought to be horsewhipped." "Yes, madam," Violet said quietly. Martha turned back to her, hands on her hips. "I run a respectable boarding house. Clean rooms, decent food, no nonsense. I've got space for you and the babies, and I could use help with the cooking and cleaning if you are willing to work for your keep." "I am very willing," Violet said quickly. "I am a hard worker, I promise. And I know how to cook and clean and do laundry." "Good. Then we have an arrangement." Martha nodded decisively. "You will have your own room, small but private. I have got 3 other boarders right now, all working men, all respectful. Any trouble from them and they answer to me. And I do not tolerate any impropriety, so there will be no men in your room and you will keep proper hours. Understood?" "Yes, madam." "Thank you, madam." Martha's stern expression softened slightly. "James told me you are married. Even if the man abandoned you, legally you are still his wife. I cannot have you at my boarding house if you are going to bring scandal down on us." Violet's heart sank, but before she could speak, James cut in. "I sent a telegram to the marshal, made a formal report about what Thomas Morrison did. That is abandonment and attempted murder. Any judge would grant Violet a divorce based on that." "Good," Martha said. "We will get that sorted out proper. In the meantime, people will talk no matter what we do, but I trust James's word that you are a decent woman in a bad situation. That is good enough for me." The relief was so intense Violet felt dizzy. "Thank you, both of you. I do not know how I will ever repay this kindness." "You will repay it by getting back on your feet and taking care of those babies," Martha said briskly. "Now let us get you packed up. The road is clear enough to get to town before dark if we leave soon." The next hour was a flurry of activity. James and Martha helped Violet gather the few belongings she had, wrapping the babies warmly for the journey. James fashioned a sling that allowed Violet to carry both twins against her chest, leaving her hands free to hold onto the saddle. She would ride with Martha while James led them on his horse. As they prepared to leave, Violet found a moment alone with James in the barn. He was saddling his horse, his movements efficient and practiced, and she stood in the doorway watching him. "I do not know how to thank you," she said softly. "You saved our lives, all three of us." James looked up, his green eyes warm. "You do not need to thank me, Violet." "Yes, I do. You took us in when you did not have to, cared for us, protected us, found us a place to go. That is not nothing. It is what any decent person would do. But not everyone is decent. I have learned that the hard way." Violet took a step closer. "You are a good man, James O'Brien." "The best I have ever known." Color rose in James's cheeks and he looked away. "I am just trying to do right. You are doing more than that, and I hope—" She hesitated, then pressed on. "I hope this is not goodbye. I hope I will see you again." James met her eyes and something intense passed between them. "Georgetown is not that big. I am sure we will cross paths." "I would like that." They rode into Georgetown as the sun was setting, painting the snowy mountains in shades of gold and pink. The town was larger than Violet had expected. A sprawling collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that was busy even in the fading light. Miners and cowboys and businessmen moved about their business, and the sound of a piano drifted from a nearby saloon. Martha's boarding house was a two-story building near the edge of town, painted white with green shutters. Inside it was warm and clean, with polished wood floors and lace curtains on the windows. Martha showed Violet to a small room on the second floor that contained a narrow bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair near the window. "It is not fancy, but it is yours," Martha said. "Meals are at 7 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening. You will help me prepare and serve them and clean up after. The rest of your time is your own, though I will need help with laundry on Mondays and room cleaning on Thursdays. The outhouse is out back, and there is a bathing room at the end of the hall. You get 1 hot bath a week, more if you are willing to heat the water yourself." "It is perfect," Violet said honestly. The room was small, but it was hers, and after the months of traveling and the terror of the storm, it felt like a palace. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. Martha is fine. Now get yourself and those babies settled. Dinner is in an hour and you look like you could use a proper meal." Martha paused at the door. "James is a good man, as you have seen. He does not involve himself in town much, but people respect him. You are lucky he found you." "I know," Violet said softly. After Martha left, Violet sat in the rocking chair with both babies in her arms and looked out the window at the darkening street. She could see the mountains in the distance, snow-covered and imposing. Somewhere out there was the place where Thomas had left her to die. Somewhere out there James was riding back to his cabin alone. She thought about the past few days, about the way James had cared for them without asking for anything in return. The way he had held Sarah with such gentleness, the way he had listened to Violet's story without judgment, the way her heart had stuttered when their eyes met across the cabin. It was too soon for such feelings, she told herself. She was still married, still technically Thomas Morrison's wife, and she had 2 babies to think about. She could not afford to be distracted by a handsome cowboy with kind eyes. But as she rocked her children and watched the stars come out over Georgetown, Violet could not quite make herself regret the flutter of hope in her chest. Life at Martha's boarding house fell into a routine over the following weeks. Violet rose early to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, then spent the morning caring for the twins and helping with cleaning. Afternoons were for laundry and mending, and evenings were for preparing and serving dinner. It was hard work, but Violet did not mind. It felt good to be useful, to be earning her keep rather than being dependent on charity. The other boarders were respectful as Martha had promised. There was Robert, an older miner who was quiet and polite, William, a young clerk at the general store who was shy around Violet, and Henry, a ranch hand who was rarely around. They all treated her with courtesy, and several of them brought small gifts for the twins: a carved wooden rattle from Robert, a soft blanket from William. Martha proved to be stern but fair, and Violet came to genuinely like the older woman. She had been widowed young, Martha told her, and had built her boarding house from nothing through sheer determination. She understood what it was like to be a woman alone in the West. "You are doing well," Martha said one morning as they kneaded bread together. "Better than I expected, honestly. Some women would have fallen apart after what you went through." "I do not have the luxury of falling apart," Violet replied. "I have 2 babies depending on me. Still, it takes strength. You should be proud of yourself." The words warmed Violet more than she expected. Praise had been scarce in her marriage to Thomas. "Thank you, Martha. Have you heard anything from that husband of yours?" "No, and I do not expect to. James was right, I think. Thomas is gone for good. Good riddance to bad rubbish." Martha punched the dough with more force than necessary. "The marshal is working on the divorce. Should be finalized in a few months, he says. Then you will be free and clear." Free. The word felt strange. Violet had been someone's daughter, then someone's wife, then someone's mother. She had never just been herself, free and independent. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "What will I do then?" she wondered aloud. "Whatever you want. You could keep working here or find other work in town. You could even leave Georgetown if you wanted, though I would be sorry to see you go." "I do not want to leave," Violet said, surprising herself with how quickly and firmly she said it. "I like it here." "It is a good town," Martha agreed. "Growing fast, lots of opportunities for those willing to work hard, and the people are decent by and large. You could build a good life here." Violet thought about that as she shaped the dough into loaves. A good life. For so long she had been focused on just surviving, on getting through each day. But maybe Martha was right. Maybe she could have more than that. Maybe she could build something real here in Georgetown. She was putting the bread in the oven when there was a knock at the back door. Martha went to answer it, and Violet heard James's voice, low and warm. "Morning, Martha. I brought some eggs from my chickens and a side of bacon I smoked. Figured you could use them." "You are a saint, James O'Brien." "Come in, come in." James stepped into the kitchen, his hat in his hands, and his eyes immediately found Violet. "Morning, Violet. How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you." Violet was acutely aware of the flour on her hands and dress, of the way her hair was falling out of its bun. "And thank you for the report to the marshal. Martha says it is helping with the divorce. It is the least I could do." James set his offerings on the table. "How are the twins?" "Growing like weeds. Samuel is starting to smile now, and Sarah has discovered her hands. It is wonderful to watch." "I would like to see them sometime, if that would be all right." "Of course." Violet felt her cheeks warm. "You are welcome to visit any time." Martha cleared her throat meaningfully, and both of them turned to look at her. She was smiling in a way that suggested she found this all very amusing. "Why do not you two sit and have some coffee? I can finish up here." "I do not want to impose," James started, but Martha waved him off. "You brought me eggs and bacon. The least I can do is give you coffee. Violet, go wash up and then show James the babies." "They are upstairs sleeping, are they not?" "Yes, but—" "Go on. I will call you if I need you." Violet was very aware of James following her up the stairs to her small room. It felt strangely intimate, having him in her private space, even with the door open and Martha downstairs. The twins were asleep in the drawer cradle that James had given her, their small faces peaceful. "They have grown," James said softly, leaning over to look at them. "Look at that. Samuel is bigger already. He eats like he is starving." Violet smiled down at her son. "Sarah is more delicate. She takes her time with everything. Different personalities already. Very different." She looked up at James and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What? Nothing. You look good, Violet, healthy, like the life here agrees with you. It does." "Thanks to you and Martha." "I did not do much. You did everything." Violet reached out before she could stop herself and touched his arm. "I mean it, James. You gave me a chance when I had nothing. That is something I will never forget." James covered her hand with his own, his palm warm and rough with calluses. They stood like that for a long moment, the babies sleeping beside them, the house quiet around them. Violet felt something shift inside her, something that had been frozen since the storm starting to thaw. Then Martha called from downstairs that the coffee was ready and the moment broke. James stepped back, clearing his throat, and Violet tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We should go down," she said. "Yes, yes, we should." But as they descended the stairs together, Violet could still feel the warmth of his hand on hers, and she knew something had changed between them. Something tentative and new and full of possibility. James started coming by the boarding house regularly after that. Sometimes he brought food, eggs or milk or fresh meat. Sometimes he brought carved wooden toys for the twins. Sometimes he just came to talk, sitting in Martha's kitchen over coffee and sharing stories of his work on the ranch. Violet found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and worried her. She was still legally married, still Thomas Morrison's wife in the eyes of the law. It was not proper to be thinking about another man, to be feeling what she was starting to feel. But propriety had never kept her warm in a snowstorm. Propriety had not saved her when Thomas left her to die. James had done that, and the feelings growing between them felt as natural as breathing. Martha noticed, of course. The older woman was far too sharp to miss the way Violet and James looked at each other, the way they found excuses to be near each other. "You need to be careful," Martha warned one evening after James had left. "People will talk if they think something improper is going on." "Nothing improper is happening," Violet protested. "We are just friends." "Friends?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you are calling it?" Violet felt her cheeks heat. "I am still married, Martha. I know that. I am not. We are not." "I know you are not." Martha's expression softened. "You are a good woman, Violet, and James is a good man. I am not saying there is anything wrong with how you feel. I'm just saying you need to wait until the divorce is final. Georgetown is a small town and gossip spreads fast. You do not want to give people reason to talk poorly of you." "You are right. I know you are right. But once that divorce comes through," Martha smiled, "well, then all bets are off." Winter deepened and the new year of 1879 arrived. The twins grew stronger and more alert, their tiny personalities emerging more each day. Samuel was bold and loud, always demanding attention. Sarah was quieter but watchful, her dark eyes taking in everything around her. Violet fell more in love with them every day and with Georgetown itself. The town was rough and ready, but there was a sense of community she had never experienced before. People helped each other through the harsh winter, sharing supplies and news. The church held socials that brought everyone together, and even the saloons had a code of conduct that kept things from getting too wild. And through it all, James was there. Not always, not every day, but enough that his presence became a constant in her life. He taught her to recognize the signs of changing weather, showed her which shops in town had the best prices, introduced her to people he knew. He never overstepped, never tried to claim more than friendship, but Violet could see in his eyes that he wanted more. She wanted more too. But Martha was right. They had to wait. The telegram came in late February. Violet was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Martha came in with the paper in her hand, her expression unreadable. "It is done," Martha said simply. "The divorce is final." Violet's hand stilled over the bread she was slicing. "What?" "The judge granted it based on abandonment and attempted murder. You are no longer Mrs. Thomas Morrison. Legally you are free, free." That word again, but this time it felt real. Violet sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "I am divorced." "You are." Martha sat down across from her. "How do you feel?" "I do not know." Violet pressed her hands to her face. "Relieved, terrified, grateful, sad even though I should not be. You can be sad about how things ended even if you know they needed to end." Martha reached across the table and squeezed Violet's hand. "You are free now to make your own choices, to build your own life. That is a gift, even if it does not feel like it right now. What if I make the wrong choices? Then you learn from them and make better ones next time. That is all any of us can do." Violet thought about that as she finished preparing lunch. She thought about it as she served the boarders and cleaned up after. She thought about it as she nursed the twins and put them down for their nap. She was free. Free to choose her own path, to make her own decisions, and she knew exactly what she wanted. James came by that evening, as he often did on Thursdays. Violet met him at the door before he could even knock, her heart pounding. "The divorce came through," she said without preamble. "I am free." James went very still, his green eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" "I am better than all right, I am." She took a breath. "I am ready to move forward, to stop being afraid of what people might think or say, to start living the life I want to live." "And what life is that?" James asked quietly. "One with you in it, if that is what you want too." For a long moment James just looked at her. Then he smiled, a slow, warm smile that made her heart flip. "That is what I have wanted since I pulled you out of that snowstorm. I just did not think I had the right to say so." "You have the right now." Violet stepped closer. "I am not asking for promises or commitments. I know it is too soon for that, but I want you to know how I feel. I want to court properly if you are willing. More than willing." James reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You are the bravest, strongest woman I have ever known, Violet Morrison. I would be honored to court you. Then it is settled." Violet felt like she was glowing from the inside out. "Where do we start? How about with a walk? It is a nice evening and the stars are out. We could walk down to the end of the street and back. Let me get my coat." They walked slowly through the cold night, their breath fogging in the air. Georgetown was quiet at this hour. Most people settled in for the evening. James told her about his work, about the horses he was breaking and the cattle he was raising. Violet told him about the twins, about their latest developments, and the way they were starting to recognize her. It was simple and perfect and exactly what she needed. When they returned to the boarding house, James took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Thank you for this evening, Violet. Thank you for being patient with me, for waiting. You were worth waiting for." He left and Violet stood on the porch for a long moment, watching him ride away. Inside, Martha was waiting with a knowing smile. "So it is official then. You two are courting." "We are." Violet could not keep the smile off her face. Is that all right with you, I mean? I know you were concerned about gossip. The divorce is final and you are a free woman. You have every right to court whoever you choose. And James is a good man. I could not ask for better for you. Martha hugged her, a rare display of affection. Be happy, Violet, you deserve it. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Violet had experienced with Thomas. Where Thomas had been charming but shallow, James was steady and deep. He showed his care not through flowery words but through actions, through the way he always made sure she had enough firewood, through the blankets he brought for the twins, through the way he listened when she talked. They walked together often, sometimes with the twins bundled into a pram that William the store clerk had helped James build. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting side by side and sharing a hymnal. They went to the town socials where they danced together, James's hand warm and sure on her waist. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was different from what Violet had felt for Thomas. That had been a desperate hope, a need to be saved and protected. This was partnership and respect, a recognition of each other as equals. James never tried to control or diminish her. He encouraged her to have her own opinions, to make her own choices. He treated the twins as if they were precious, not burdens. And when he looked at her, Violet felt beautiful and valued in a way she never had before. Spring came to Georgetown in a rush of melting snow and blooming wildflowers. The town seemed to expand overnight as new miners and settlers arrived. Business boomed, and there was a sense of possibility in the air. One evening in late April, James took Violet for a ride out to his cabin. It was the first time she had been back since those days after the storm, and seeing the small structure brought back a flood of memories. "It looks different in the daylight," she said as James helped her down from the horse. "Everything does." He took her hand and led her inside. The cabin was tidy, everything in its place, and a fire was already burning in the hearth. "I wanted to bring you here because I have something I want to say." Violet's heart began to pound. "What is it?" James turned to face her, his expression serious. "I love you, Violet. I have loved you since those days when you were fighting so hard to take care of your babies, since I saw how strong and brave you were. I love the way you laugh, the way you care for Samuel and Sarah, the way you are building a new life for yourself. I love everything about you." Tears pricked at Violet's eyes. "I love you too, James, so much. I want to marry you. I want to be a father to your children and build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "Will you marry me, Violet Morrison?" "Yes," Violet said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." James slipped the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into his arms, kissing her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Violet felt like she was finally, truly home. They were married in June in the small church in Georgetown, with Martha standing as Violet's witness and Robert the miner standing for James. It was a simple ceremony, but Violet had never felt more beautiful or more loved. She wore a dress that Martha had helped her make from soft blue fabric, and James wore his best suit, his dark hair slicked back and his green eyes bright with joy. The twins, now 7 months old, gurgled happily through the ceremony, passed between Martha and the other guests. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Violet with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance wiped away tears. The wedding breakfast was held at Martha's boarding house, with half the town in attendance. People brought food and gifts, celebrating the union with genuine joy. It was clear that Violet and James had won the respect and affection of Georgetown, that their love story had touched something in the community. To new beginnings, Martha toasted, raising her glass, "and to love that endures through all storms." "Hear, hear," the crowd echoed. James and Violet moved into his cabin after the wedding, the small structure now feeling warm and welcoming. James had added on a room for the twins, building a proper cradle for each of them. He had also expanded the kitchen and added shelves for all of Violet's things. "It is not much yet," he said as he carried her over the threshold, "but we will build it up together, make it into a real home." "It already is a home," Violet said, looking around at the place where her life had been saved. "It has been since that first night." Life settled into a new rhythm. Violet cared for the twins and the household while James worked his land and broke horses for other ranchers. It was hard work but satisfying, and for the first time in her life, Violet felt truly settled. She had a husband who loved and respected her, 2 healthy children, and a community that had welcomed her. The twins thrived under James's care. He doted on them, teaching Samuel to clap and helping Sarah learn to sit up. He never once treated them as anything other than his own children, and both babies clearly adored him. Samuel's first word was "Papa," directed at James, and Violet cried happy tears at the sight. Summer turned to fall and fall to winter again, the seasons cycling through as Violet and James built their life together. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. In the spring of 1880, Violet discovered she was pregnant again. The news filled her with both joy and fear, memories of her difficult pregnancy with the twins still fresh. But James was there for every moment. He held her when morning sickness left her weak, rubbed her feet when they swelled, talked to her belly when the baby started to kick. And when their son was born in November, healthy and squalling, James cried as he held him. "What should we name him?" Violet asked, exhausted but elated. "What about Joseph, after my father? Joseph O'Brien, I love it." They added another room to the cabin for Joseph, and suddenly their small home felt wonderfully full. 3 children meant 3 times the work, but also 3 times the joy. Samuel and Sarah, now nearly 2 years old, were fascinated by their baby brother and wanted to help with everything. "We have made a family," James said one night as they sat by the fire, watching the children sleep. "A real, true family." "We have," Violet agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy." "Neither did I." He kissed the top of her head. "But here we are." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, sick livestock and failed crops. There were times when money was tight and times when the work seemed endless. But through it all, Violet and James faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each trial they overcame. In 1882, Violet gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace. James joked that twins clearly ran in the family and they should probably stop at 5 children. But when Violet gave birth to another son, Matthew, in 1884, neither of them could bring themselves to regret it. Their cabin expanded over the years, growing from that small 2-room structure into a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a wide porch. James's ranch prospered, and he became known throughout the region as one of the best horse trainers in Colorado. Violet started a small business of her own, selling baked goods and preserves in town, and became known for her generous spirit and wise counsel. The children grew up strong and healthy, surrounded by love and stability. Samuel became a rancher like his father, though he also had a gift for carpentry. Sarah had her mother's head for business and helped expand the preserves operation into a thriving enterprise. Joseph became a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend college. Emma and Grace became teachers, opening a school in Georgetown for the children of miners and ranchers. And Matthew, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer. Martha remained a constant presence in their lives until her death in 1895. Violet mourned her like a mother, grateful for everything the older woman had done for her. In her will, Martha left the boarding house to Violet, who ran it for several years before passing it on to Emma and Grace. Thomas Morrison was never heard from again. Occasionally, Violet wondered what had become of him, but mostly she did not think of him at all. He was a shadow from another life, one that bore no resemblance to the rich, full life she had built with James. The only time she really remembered that terrible day in the snowstorm was on the anniversary each year. On that day, James would always take her back to the place where he had found her, where she had thought she and her babies would die. They would stand there together, looking at the mountains and remember how far they had come. "I was so scared that day," Violet said one year, when they were both in their 50s and their children were grown. "I thought it was the end." "It was the end," James said, his arm around her waist. "The end of one life and the beginning of another. The beginning of us. The beginning of everything good." They returned home to find their house full of children and grandchildren, 3 generations gathered for Sunday dinner. The table was crowded and noisy and perfect, filled with laughter and love. As Violet looked around at the family she and James had created, at the life they had built from nothing but determination and love, she felt overwhelming gratitude. She had been abandoned in a snowstorm, left to die with 2 helpless babies. But she had been found. She had been saved, and she had lived to build a legacy of love that would continue long after she was gone. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons changing and children growing. Violet and James grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming weathered and worn from decades of hard work. But their love remained as strong as it had been on that day when James had pulled her from the snow, perhaps even stronger for having been tested and proven true time and again. Samuel married a woman named Catherine from Denver and gave them 4 grandchildren. Sarah married a banker from Georgetown and had 3 children of her own. Joseph brought home a wife from veterinary school, a brilliant woman named Rebecca, who became the first female veterinarian in Colorado. Emma and Grace, inseparable as always, never married but raised several orphan children together, creating a family all their own. And Matthew married his college sweetheart and settled in Denver, though he came home often with his wife and their 2 sons. The ranch that James had built became a family legacy, passed down to Samuel but worked by all of them at various times. The land that had seemed so lonely when James first claimed, it was now filled with houses and barns, with children running through the fields and the sound of laughter echoing off the mountains. Georgetown itself had changed over the years. The mining boom had faded, but the town had adapted, becoming a place where families settled and businesses thrived. Violet and James were respected elders now, people who had helped build the community and who embodied its values of hard work and mutual support. In the summer of 1908, on their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration. The whole town turned out, gathering at the ranch for a party that lasted from afternoon until the stars came out. There was music and dancing, mountains of food, and endless stories about Violet and James and the life they had built together. "Tell us the story again," one of the grandchildren begged. "About how you met." Violet looked at James and smiled. They had told this story so many times over the years, but it never got old. "It was a terrible snowstorm," Violet began, and the children leaned in close. "The worst I had ever seen. I was lost and alone with your Uncle Samuel and Aunt Sarah, who were just tiny babies then. I thought we were going to die. "But Grandpa found you," one of the grandchildren said, knowing the story by heart but wanting to hear it anyway. "But Grandpa found us," Violet agreed. "He saved our lives and brought us to his cabin, and from that moment on, everything changed." "It was the best storm of my life," James added, his eyes twinkling, "because it brought me your grandmother." "And you have been together ever since," Matthew's oldest son said. "Ever since," James confirmed. He raised his glass in a toast. "To storms that bring blessings, to second chances. To family and to love." "To family and to love," everyone echoed, and the sound of clinking glasses rang out across the ranch. As the party continued into the evening, Violet found a quiet moment to sit on the porch and watch it all. Her children and grandchildren were everywhere, playing and talking and laughing. James was in the middle of a group of his sons and grandsons, telling some story with animated gestures that had them all roaring with laughter. This was what she had almost lost that day in the snow. This family, this love, this life. If Thomas had succeeded in abandoning her to death, none of this would exist. Samuel and Sarah would never have grown up to have children of their own. Joseph and Emma and Grace and Matthew would never have been born. These grandchildren would never have existed. The thought made her shiver despite the warm summer evening. "You all right, Mama?" Sarah asked, appearing at her side with a shawl. "You looked like you were miles away." "Just thinking about how lucky we are," Violet said, accepting the shawl gratefully. "How lucky I am." "We are the lucky ones," Sarah said firmly. "You and Papa built all of this. You gave us everything. We gave you love. The rest you all did yourselves." Sarah hugged her, and then Emma and Grace joined them, and then all her daughters-in-law, and suddenly Violet was surrounded by the women of her family, all of them talking and laughing together. It was a moment of pure joy, one that she tucked away in her memory to treasure. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, James came to sit beside Violet on the porch. He took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. "It has been a good life," he said softly. "The best life," Violet agreed. "I would not change a single moment. Not even that day in the storm," Violet thought about it. "Especially not that day, because that was the day everything began." They sat together watching their family, watching the life they had created unfold before them in all its messy, beautiful glory. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Violet felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had been lost, and she had been found. She had been abandoned, and she had been claimed. She had faced death, and she had chosen life. And what a life it had been! The years continued their steady march forward. Violet and James celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by family, and then their 45th. They became great-grandparents, marveling at the new generation that carried their blood and their legacy. James's health began to fail in his 70s. His strong body, worn down by decades of hard labor, started to betray him. But he faced it with the same quiet courage he had shown in everything else, and Violet was by his side through every moment. One evening in the spring of 1915, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, James turned to Violet with a serious expression. "I need you to promise me something," he said. "Anything," Violet replied, though she did not like the tone of his voice. "When I am gone, I need you to keep living. Not just surviving, but really living. Do not let yourself become a ghost mourning what was lost. Promise me." "James, do not talk like that. Promise me, Violet." She looked at him, this man who had saved her life and then made it worth living. "I promise, but you have to promise me something too." "What is that?" "Promise me you will not go yet. We still have so much life left to live." James smiled and kissed her forehead. "I will do my best." He kept that promise for another 3 years, fighting to stay with her even as his body grew weaker. But in the winter of 1918, James O'Brien passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Violet holding his hand and their children gathered around them. The grief was profound, a hollow ache in Violet's chest that she thought might never heal. James had been her partner for nearly 40 years, her best friend and greatest love. The world felt impossibly empty without him, but she had made him a promise, and Violet Morrison O'Brien was a woman who kept her promises. She continued living at the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued her business, continued going to church, continued being a vital part of the Georgetown community. She carried her grief, but she did not let it define her. And every year on the anniversary of that day in the snowstorm, Violet made the journey up the mountain to the place where James had found her. She would stand there in the wind and remember, would thank God for the storm that had brought her the greatest blessing of her life. When Violet passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1925, she was 84 years old and surrounded by 5 children, 19 grandchildren, and 32 great-grandchildren. Her funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Colorado, people who had been touched by her kindness and generosity over the decades. They buried her next to James on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that read "Beloved" beneath their names. And on the day of her funeral, as her family stood around the grave site mourning and celebrating her life, snow began to fall even though it was April, soft, gentle flakes that caught in hair and on eyelashes, that turned the world briefly white and beautiful. "Look at that," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even the weather is mourning her." But Sarah, who had always been the most intuitive of the children, shook her head. "No, it is not mourning, it is celebrating. Papa found Mama in a snowstorm. Maybe he is finding her again now." And as the snow continued to fall, soft and gentle and kind, the family chose to believe that was true. That somewhere beyond the veil, Violet and James were together again, walking hand in hand through a world made new. The ranch continued through the generations, each one adding to the legacy that Violet and James had begun. The story of how they met, of the cowboy who found a woman and her twin babies in a snowstorm and saved them all, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. And always, always, it ended the same way, with love, with family, with the understanding that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings, and that being found by the right person can change everything. The twins that Violet had fought so hard to protect, Samuel and Sarah, lived long lives themselves. Samuel passed down his carpentry skills and his father's quiet strength to his children and grandchildren. Sarah built her mother's preserve business into a thriving company that eventually expanded throughout Colorado. They both made sure that the next generations knew where they came from, knew the story of their mother's courage and their father's kindness. Georgetown continued to grow and change, evolving from a rough mining town into a historic community that preserved its past while embracing its future. The O'Brien Ranch became a landmark, a place where tourists could come to learn about the real history of the West, about the ordinary people who had built extraordinary lives through hard work and love. And on a hill overlooking it all, 2 simple graves stood as testament to a love that had endured every trial, overcome every obstacle, and built a legacy that would never be forgotten. Violet Morrison O'Brien, who had been abandoned in a snowstorm with twin babies and given up for dead, had instead lived to see her family flourish across 4 generations. She had built a life of meaning and purpose, had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. James O'Brien, The cowboy who had found her and saved her and loved her had kept his promise to always be there for her, right up until his last breath and beyond. Their story was one of survival and second chances, of finding light in the darkest moments, of building something beautiful from the broken pieces of what came before. It was a love story, a Western love story, as wild and beautiful and enduring as the mountains themselves, and it was true. Every word of it. From the moment James pulled Violet from that frozen outcropping of rocks to the moment they were reunited in death, their love had been the foundation on which everything else was built. It had survived abandonment and hardship, poverty and loss, the countless small challenges of daily life and the great trials that tested them to their limits. And in the end, it had triumphed. Their children carried that legacy forward, teaching their own children about the power of real love, of commitment that went deeper than pretty words or romantic gestures. They taught about partnership and respect, about choosing each other day after day, year after year, through everything life could throw at them. And somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, when the snow falls soft and gentle on a spring day, people say you can still see them walking together. A tall cowboy with green eyes and a woman with dark hair, her arms carrying two babies close to her heart. A family that began in a storm and endured forever, their love as permanent and powerful as the mountains themselves. This was their story. This was their legacy. This was the life they built from nothing but courage, determination, and a love that refused to die no matter what tried to destroy it. And it all began with a snowstorm, a desperate woman, two crying babies, and a cowboy who heard their cries and chose to help. Sometimes that is all it takes to change everything. One person who chooses kindness when cruelty would be easier. One person who sees another's humanity when everyone else looks away. One person who says, "I will help you," and means it. James O'Brien had been that person for Violet Morrison. And in saving her, he had saved himself too, had found the family and purpose and love he had been seeking all along. Their graves stood on that hill for generations after, carefully maintained by their descendants, visited by family members who came to pay their respects and remember where they came from. Fresh flowers appeared there weekly, placed by hands that spanned from young great-great-grandchildren barely old enough to walk to elderly great-grandchildren with silver in their own hair. The ranch house itself was eventually converted into a museum, preserving the O'Brien family story for future generations. Visitors could walk through the rooms where Violet and James had raised their 6 children, could see the additions James had built with his own hands, could stand on the porch where they had spent countless evenings watching the sunset together. And in the corner of what had been their bedroom, preserved behind glass, was a simple gold ring and a worn leather hat, her wedding ring, his favorite hat, small objects that represented a lifetime of love and commitment. But the real legacy was not in objects or buildings or even in the land itself. The real legacy was in the people, in the dozens, and then hundreds of descendants who carried forward the values Violet and James had embodied. Hard work and kindness, courage and compassion, the willingness to help others and the strength to keep going when times got hard. That legacy lived on in the rancher who stopped to help a stranger with a broken-down car on a lonely road, in the teacher who stayed late to help a struggling student, in the neighbor who brought food to a family in crisis, in the countless small acts of kindness and courage that echoed through generations, ripples from that first moment when James O'Brien had chosen to help instead of ride past. And so the story continued, long after both of them were gone, long after even their children had passed. It continued in blood and memory, in values passed down and stories retold, in the way each generation learned what real love looked like and tried to build it in their own lives. The woman who had been abandoned in a snowstorm had become a matriarch whose influence touched hundreds of lives. The cowboy who had saved her had become a patriarch whose legacy of kindness and strength echoed through time. Together they had built something that could not be destroyed by death or time, or the inevitable changes that life brought. They had built a family. They had built a love story for the ages. And on cold winter nights in Georgetown, Colorado, when the snow fell thick and fast and the wind howled through the mountains, old-timers still told the story to anyone who would listen. About the storm of 1878, about a woman and twin babies left to die, about a cowboy who heard their cries and saved them all, about how the worst day of her life had become the first day of their life together, about how love, real love, could transform everything, and about how sometimes, just sometimes, the storms that threaten to destroy us actually deliver exactly what we need. This was the story of Violet and James O'Brien. This was their triumph, their legacy, their gift to all who came after, and it would never be forgotten.